Now we're going to do a block connecting with communities. So there's going to be some more social art, some more social observations in a way. And the first speaker is Georgette Koning. And she's a fashion journalist. And not a bit of a fashion journalist, a real all-the-way fashion journalist. She writes for all main papers in the Netherlands, NRC Handelsblad, Financieel Dagblad. She writes for the Dutch edition of Vogue. She studied at the Rietveld Academy, so she has a sort of artistic background, went into writing. We're very happy to have her, Miss Georgette Koning.
Fashion reflects the time we live in. It responds and anticipates faster than every other design discipline. There is romantic fashion, sporty fashion, chic fashion, but can fashion arouse aggression? Can fashion cause disorder? Can fashion provoke? And how is it designed then? With what forms, colors and materials? The passive and aggressive aspects of fashion and clothing are what I want to talk about. Fashion is a shield and a sword. That's how I see it. Fashion is a shield and a sword. Clothing is a screen we can retreat behind. It protects us not only from the wind and rain, but also, certainly in the modern era, from the gaze and judgments of others. Our clothes empower us to influence the judgment of others and conceal who we really are. Fashion is not only a shield, but also a sword. It enables us to show to the world outside who we are in an aggressive manner and to show we don't care about their judgment. The clearest example of that is punk clothing, which amounted to a declaration of war against everything that was middle class and conventional. And 30 years later, black leather, studs, ribs and safety pins are still enough to cause a fuss on the street. Sword and shield are often closely connected to each other. The youths that hang around with hoodies pulled way down over their foreheads seem, at first glance, to be withdrawn into themselves. They express, I am who I am, and I feel happy in this formless and uncomplicated warm sleeping suit, and I really couldn't care less if I look like a big baby. It is precisely that disinterest, echoed in their body language, that is innate to every generation of young people. No matter what fashion looks like, it needs a breeding ground. The dominant glamour of actresses in princess dresses doesn't take fashion any further. But it is something the masses are mad about. The glamour fascination started with the adoration of film stars, royalty and then pop stars. The accessibility of luxury logo labels in every city and in every country, from the West to the Far East, ensures that it has come so far and that it has spread across the globe like a virus, and even new markets lacking a Western fashion tradition. From the catwalks of Paris, New York, London and Milan, we have witnessed an opposing view to this glamorization in recent years with the dark designs of Garrett Pugh, Red Hourani and Rick Owens. Their fashion design is grounded in aesthetic, however, not in idealistic considerations. What does demonstrate an idealistic point of view is what I call the soft fashion movement, with countless green fashion concepts. Think, for example, certified biofabrics, new sustainability materials, cleaner production techniques, and recycling/upcycling. Sustainability has penetrated to the heart of the fashion industry. The most important lesson that this movement has learned to be successful is that the finest result, the product from bag to dress, has to have a high fashion allure in everything. On the one hand, this indicates the obviousness of the material, and on the other hand, it plays down the huge developments achieved in the area of sustainability in recent years. A sustainable article of clothing, therefore, fits seamlessly with current fashion, and rebels like Rick Owens and Garrett Pugh are not really revolting against anything. All they are putting forward is a slight darker aesthetic. For fashion that expresses a really aggressive aversion to contemporary society, we now have to go back more than 30 years in time. Punk is primarily a style of music, but when it started in 1977, it was also a fashion revolution. With dyed mohawk hairstyles, torn leather jackets, chains, keys and locks and dog collars around the neck symbolized a shackled generation. In terms of outward appearance, punk was the last conspicuous youth culture. Today's occupiers are the punks of earlier times. All the more remarkable, therefore, that the sympathizers of the Occupy movement launched again the excesses of the banks do not express their dissatisfaction through clothing. An explanation could be that, in contrast to young punks, occupiers come from various age groups, and for most people, the adolescence phase of shocking has already passed. Your typical occupier is well-read and clever. One icon is Justin Stone Diaz. This leader of the Wall Street Occupy movement sports a fashionable trimmed beard, wears cheerfully striped polo shirts and an easygoing cardigan. He touts his message through his baseball cap. He is the prototype of the modern activist and incomparable with the leader of the punk movement in his heydays, Johnny Rotten, who screamed his message out loudly, even with his choice of clothing. Last year, the fashion and style section of the New York Times wondered what occupiers wore and why. One girl, a high-heeled activist in a tight mini dress, wondered, how does a protest outfit look like? Just imagine getting beaten up and arrested. You have to think about the elements and the forces that come up against you. She was wearing sunglasses by Michael Kors. That said, the street is still the setting for disturbing fashion, with a main role set aside for fashion labels that would prefer to be the center of attention for other reasons. Many of the people involved in the riots last year in England were wearing Adidas. With a hoodie or a cap over their heads, they felt protected from the ever-present cameras. But while you could not indeed see their faces, the logos were all too visible. So Adidas became associated with crime. Televisions and newspapers showed that a large number of the rioters had preference for that particular sports brand. When the extreme right Norwegian activist Anders Breivik appeared in a Lacoste polo, alarm bells definitely sounded at a French label. Such a thing can cause image problems. If a certain subculture suddenly makes off with your label. Luckily for Lacoste and Adidas, the media didn't make too much an issue of it, and the brands also let it pass quietly. When about 10 years ago the British label Ben Sherman and Burberry noticed that hooligans and skinheads were starting to wear its products, they took measures and halted deliveries to certain shops and withdrew certain items from the collection that were popular with right-wing skinheads and hooligans. Another company that keeps close tabs on distribution is Fred Perry. The British fashion company was founded in the late 50s by tennis champion Fred Perry. His white tennis polo shirt was very popular among sports people, but in the late 50s it started to appeal to British mods who combined it with their parkas. Then it was adopted by young working-class skinheads who did not yet express far-right sympathies. Last year, I interviewed photographer Arie Versluis. Together with Ellie Uitenbroek, he has spent this past 16 years classifying 136 identities for their Exactitudes book, from bald-headed gabbers in Australian training suits to young activists in t-shirts with slogans to skinheads in Fred Perry polos. Arie Versluis himself is a keen Fred Perry fan. He discovered his favorite polo label in the late 1970s in the London gay scene. Wow, Arie Versluis thought, what a powerful piece of clothing. When Arie is wearing his polo, he feels like a knight in his snow-white tight polo shirt. Or rather, he corrects himself like a Greek Olympian sports hero. Different people from different subcultures feel attracted to the Fred Perry polo shirt because it contains an echo of rebellion thanks to rebel groups like skinheads. The laurel wreath stands for victory and exudes nationalism and positivity and toughness, but carry out a typical intervention and the logo's meaning becomes radically different. The Belgian graphic designer Tom Toussaint added a hammer, but the hammer has a tool of the craftsman. With his edgy idiom, Toussaint remixes logos to create frightening signs that harmonize well with rebellious adolescents. A striking example is the logo of Antwerp. This is an Adidas logo, which this one. By simply turning around the T in the word Antwerp, making it appear as an inverted dagger-like crucifix. Toussaint also took the Adidas logo and changed it into a code that you could imagine being appropriated by not a very friendly subculture. Back to Adi Versluis. I asked him what he thinks of the fact that far-right radicals also wear his polo shirt. He said, "I don't think we should take it all that seriously. The line of reasoning behind the skinhead ideology back then was playing with British working class labels. They did the same with Levi's jeans, with jackets by Crombie, and with shirts by Everlast. Fred Perry belongs on that same list. I have lots of skinheads in my photography studio, and I saw it as a youthful provocation and actually too stylish to be dangerous. Stylish or not, but certainly highly dangerous, are the Al-Qaeda suicide Muslim children. Like this kid in the picture, wrapped in a coat so big that it hides a belt of bombs that determines the wide shape of his coat. In hotbeds, like Pakistan and Afghanistan and other places in the Middle East, the attire worn by youth communicates suspicion. But on the catwalk in Paris or Milan, no fashion journalist would draw such a connection after seeing the 2012 winter collection from Comme des Garçons, with larger-than-life jackets and coats under which you could conceal a lot of bombs. Extra volume, inflated shoulders, arms out of proportion, bulging backs, they featured in the show by Lanvin, Yves Saint Laurent and Balenciaga. On the one hand, volume offers a sense of protection. You can hide in your jacket. And on the other hand, volume is intimidating. My jacket is bigger than yours. Last January, the Belgian designer Raf Simons staged a parade of black suits. This dark show prompted fashion journalist Tim Blanks to call Simons the couture king of the Occupy movement. Referring to Simons' black suits, Tim Blanks wrote, "The suit is the armor of the bankster who stole the bill out. Cut that suit in a black leather and you've got yourself a cloak of evil." A cloak of evil, that sounds malicious. Can fashion be malicious? Ever since the big money has ruled the fashion business, and that's been the case since the early 1990s, with the emerge of the luxury investors who bought up fashion labels, catwalk fashion can scarcely call itself a social indicator anymore. It's simply a moneymaker. Do designers really wear blinkers, or do they genuinely convey sentiments with the collections? Look at this summer collection and ad campaigns, and you would swear that there's nothing more peace-loving than the summer of 2012, with its sweet cocktail of pastels, an ocean of floral patterns, and an explosion of color. What needs to happen for designers to suddenly realize that there is a crisis in the world? Or should we cynically conclude that designers do not respond to what's going on in the world? One of the clearest reactions to changing social and economic conditions was visible in the Parisian fashion of the early 1940s. The short dresses and wide shoulders worn at the time were a reaction on the Nazi occupation of Paris, when French women wore the jackets of men's suits and wrapped their hair with turbans. It was a fairly arrogant look and not something that you would expect from women in an occupied country. The fact that there was an economic reason, a lack of fabric and hairdresses, does nothing to lessen the powerful effect. Shoulders were also impressively wide during the 1980s. It was a time in which women rebelled power dressing and at last could forge careers wearing a mixture of powerful masculine shoulders and highly feminine elements like stilettos and pencil skirts. Punk garb is the most aggressive style of clothing since medieval knights moved around in suits of armor. A suit of armor consists of a collection of separate metal pieces modeled to fit the body and connected to one another with bands and screws. The second, rock-hard shell-like skin, is designed to impress opponents. At the same time, the cumbersome design deprives the wearer of freedom of movement and identity. Armor was in vogue for a very short time and ensured that European armies were stronger than other armies in the 15th century. By the end of that century, however, it had already become clear that the heavily clad European knight was a danger to himself. The invention of guns meant that the unsteady knight was even more vulnerable, and by the end of the 16th century, armor was only worn as a showpiece during tournaments. But armor and fashion still speak the same language. That was made clear some 10 years ago at the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna, when suits of armor were exhibited next to monumental pleated designs by the Italian designer Roberto Capucci. The same effect would also have been achieved with work by Alexander McQueen, or even with the more recent work of Iris van Herpen. While the occasionally frightening work of McQueen is repleted with explicit reference to such themes as religion and war, and bears evidence of technical innovation and craftsmanship, Van Iris focuses on crafts. She comes up with a robot-like forms through her own manner of treating and processing materials. Anything but comfortable, her pieces look like cages and forts, designed to defend or protect. In reality, however, the 3D printed skeleton pieces you see here are delicate and fragile. Given the huge interest in her designs, you could conclude that they meet a need for defense and protection in a stormy world, even if it's just the illusion of armor in the case of Van Herpen. Not only fragile, but also feminine forms can look aggressive. You can arm yourself by revealing instead of covering. Revealing, as a way of shock, is also a form of rebellion. Exposing a breast explicitly can evoke a certain degree of fear and aggression. So too can the entire arsenal of feminine weapons, including not only long and pointed nails and high heels, but also body decoration like certain tattoos and piercings that say, "Keep away," yet also scream for attention. Fashion appeals to a variety of senses. It is, by definition, visual. But perfumes also add a layer to the experience of a style or collection. Victor and Rolf arm their women and men not only with clothes, but also perfume. Scent works as an extra wall of protection around the body. With flower bomb for women and spice bomb for men, the wearer annexes a section of public space for himself or herself. At the same time, it is a seductive invitation to come closer. That Victor and Rolf play with the notion of aggression is illustrated not only by the name of the perfumes, but also by the packaging, which in both cases plays with the idea of a hand grenade. The impact of the design of a perfume bottle and accessories like stiletto heels is nothing compared to the safety pins that the right-minded punk rocker coolly pricked through his cheeks and mouth, or less scary, through his ear. Punk also stood for anti-everything. Old forms had to be destroyed. Trousers' legs were tied together with bondage straps as a metaphor for a generation that felt locked up in the world of their hard-working parents and the hippie generation. But the safety pin, once the symbol of underground and youth rebelliousness, is now a mainstream classic. Vivienne Westwood, the grandmother of punk, now sells fashionable safety pins of white gold set with diamonds all over the world. Clothing that provokes and disrupts, we haven't witnessed it since the heydays of punk. Logos occasionally cause uproar, Sometimes a certain piece of body decoration startles us. Although most tattoos have lost their threatening power, the bodies of aggressive gangsters still strike fear into us. But think of all that black leather for next winter, all those items of clothing and countless accessories fitted with pointed metal studs and dark styling. And there's just one conclusion. Fashion has taken the sting out of punk. Fashion has made violence bearable and wearable. That's it.
If you listen carefully to Georgette, you might have heard she has a cold. We are very glad you're here because you could almost not make it.
Yeah.
And so we decided not to ask any other questions.
Yeah,
thanks again, Georgette Koning.
Right.